Hi and welcome everyone. My name is Kevin Chambers and thank you for tuning in to another episode of EMA's very, very popular health and safety podcast. With us today we have the irresistible, incomparable Mauro Barsi, EMA's legal counsel. Mauro, welcome.
Thanks, Kevin. Lovely to be here. And I think that was a perfect introduction. I'll have to keep that for next time.
I practiced it several times. Now, our topic today is around drug testing at work, and on behalf of your colleagues here at EMA, I've been asked to ask you whether you've ever been caught with drugs at work.
Have been caught with drugs at work? No, I've never been caught with drugs at work.
That's what we want to hear. But seriously, though, drug testing at work, do we need it or no?
The short answer is yes.
Yep.
Generally speaking, it's one of those situations where you there are certain types of jobs, and in the law we put some flash language around all of this, folks. We'll get to it, but safety sensitive areas. So you kind of want to make sure if someone's in charge of something that's got life or death, they're right in the zone, ready to do a good job.
Yep.
And kind of fundamentally, the reason you do drug testing is an impairment conversation.
Okay.
So you're not trying to find someone who's on drugs. You're trying to make sure ultimately that everybody is fit and able to do their job when they're at work.
Okay, that makes sense. If an organisation has a suspicion, perhaps, that maybe there are some staff that are taking drugs prior to coming to work, or that are impaired from a night previously,
Doesn't have to be drugs.
No, and let's make that clear. You know, we are talking about alcohol, we're talking about marijuana, we're talking about meth, we're talking about coke and other things. What do they do in that instance? So they've got a person, they're like, we think this person's impaired. What's their next step?
Wow. I say that because there's a whole lot of stuff we have to backfill before I can answer that simply. But if we can begin our journey to start with, yes, it is lawful for you to undertake drug testing.
Okay.
However, in order to do that, you have to properly bring a drug testing policy and procedure to the workplace.
Right, so that needs to be in place first.
Yeah.
So I can't just go, I think this person, but we don't have any policies in place.
No.
You
can't just call like the Mr. Whippy Van truck driver and have them roll up.
Yep.
There's a whole thing you're meant to have done first.
Yep.
So as with anything, as you can imagine, in the employment law space, there's a consultation process. So what you would do as an employer is, before any individual or particular event occurred, you would have a process that you would say, look, we think there's some reasonableness to having drug testing in our workplace.
Yep.
You'd consult on that. Here's the reasons. Here's what we want to do. Here's the kind. And there's sort of 4 types that we're going to need to talk about.
Yep.
And then at the end of that process, you would be able to introduce drug testing. And then you would be able to, in certain circumstances, depending on which one of the models you used, be able to undertake a drug test. And to be very clear for you folks out there, that won't mean you as the HR manager or the manager trying to actually manage a drug test. 9 times out of 10, you will employ, or you will contract rather, a kind of drug testing agency who will come to the site, conduct the tests, meet the applicable NZ standard, because believe it or not, there is an NZ standard for drug testing, and then take results and follow on in an employment law context.
You mentioned that there were 4 types of tests. I think I understood that.
So as you can imagine, drug testing is a pretty invasive thing.
Yes.
There's a question about privacy. There's a question about medical giving consent to what is effectively a medical event.
Yes.
And all that stuff gets balanced out with the employer's obligations under health and safety, and people need to be safe at work. So they've balanced all of this out into 4 kind of streams of activity.
Okay.
So first off, you're allowed to do pre-employment testing, right? So if you want this job, you have to take a drug test.
Yep.
Normally, you go through all the other bits and pieces first.
Yep.
The employer makes a conditional offer. That offer is conditional on you passing a drug test.
Yep.
And 9 times out of 10, that's a self-selecting process, right? Old mate's not going to show up for the drug test and just sort of vanish off into the ether. It's pretty rare they do and they fail.
How common is that in New Zealand? Is that a reasonably common thing for a potential employee to expect?
Yeah, look, it depends on the nature of your work in industry.
Yep.
But in certain industries, you consider it basically industry standard mandatory.
Yep.
In some industries, not at all. So, for instance, as a lawyer, I've worked in lots of law places. I've never been drug tested.
Yep.
But I've done the odd summer job or worked at a few things from other times, and I've absolutely been drug tested.
Okay,
And
yep.
different jobs, different horses, different courses.
Okay, and relates to the amount of risk that's associated with the job.
It does, and it also, I think, relates to the security and safety of the role you undertake. So, for instance, if you're someone who makes sure aircraft don't fall out of the sky, that's the sort of job you're going to want to know you're ready to do 100% of the time at your peak performance.
Yep.
You know, actually, I was going to make some other suggestions or examples, but then anybody who has that job would tell me it is an important job, so I'm just not.
Yes.
I'll move on to 2, 3, and 4.
Yes, please do.
So, that's the only one that happens prior to startup, right? So after startup, i.e. after you're an employee, there are kind of 3 ideas of drug testing. So the first one is, as I've alluded to, safety-sensitive areas. In a safety-sensitive area, you can undertake what is effectively random drug testing. So for all the people who are in this bit of the business where you have to kind of have real health and safety concerns, and you have a debate about what that looks like and what the standards are, but let's just assume we know clearly what it is.
Yep.
In that pool, everybody gets signed up in that space knows they could just be drug tested.
Yep.
Job done.
Randomly.
Correct.
So they would have no idea what day it is. They're rocking to work one day and it's like, no, you've been chosen. We're going to test person A, person B, person C.
Correct. Now, generally speaking, you kind of at least have a bit of a framework around that in your policy, so that you might say you'll get tested no more than once a quarter.
Yep.
It'll be on a normal work day. We won't ask you to come in.
Yep.
And you'll be one of 3 people only selected. So you have some general understanding of what's going to happen.
Yep.
But the point is you don't know that it's about to happen.
Yep.
The other 2 types are less about sort of safety-sensitive areas and randomness, and they're more controlled. So you can have what we would describe as kind of post-event drug testing. So that means something's happened, and your policy is if something happens, like there's an accident, you knock the forklift into the car or something like that, this event has occurred. We're going to have a look into you. You're going to be required to take a drug test.
Yep.
We're super excited about that, how that's going to happen, what that's going to work, what that's going to look like, and off you go.
Yep.
That's pretty standard post-event.
And in this situation, they would be sent to a drug testing place to be tested.
Okay, we'll have a quick little detour into
Please
how this works, because this is an exciting all over the place show today, folks. So let's assume that's happened. You've got a little ding on the site, whatever it might be, and you want to call in a drug test.
Yep.
Now, again, you're going to need to follow the policies and the procedures and what's been sent out or set out in your employment agreements and your policies. And those are actually pretty hard to get right and pretty complex. So call someone like us at EMA Legal to help you out. Flash your hand. But you're going to take the person out and you're going to make sure you've got eyes on them from that moment on.
Yeah.
Right? From that moment on, you're going to essentially call kind of like the drug testing truck. And this is someone that you've already got a pre-relationship with. Yep. So you've set this up as part of your policy. People will know who they are.
Yep.
They have got all of the skill and the ability and the process to manage this according to the New Zealand standard. Because to be very clear, if you don't follow an evidentially acceptable process, you're not able to do anything with the results. Yep. To put that bluntly, if you don't test someone properly, you can't do anything about it.
Yep.
So they'll rock up in the truck, basically, and then they'll effectively take custody of the person. Most of the time, at the minute, those trucks want to do a urine test. Yep. So the person gets invited into the truck. They'll sit at the table. There'll be an explanation about what's going to happen. They'll have to give some consent, sign some forms, all the rest of that stuff. Then they'll literally walk into a private space, although the person will still have eyes on them, to undertake the urination as part of the drug test.
Yep.
Now, you can, and we are starting to see a bit of a movement towards oral fluid, so a swipe of the mouth to see what's going on. Yep. But at the minute, and I mean it changes almost on a monthly basis, but at the minute the urine test tends to be a little bit more accurate than the swab test. But obviously the swab test is far less invasive.
Yep. And the technology is changing.
The
measuring and testing is...
Yeah, and some people can also do a hair test as well. So there's plenty of ways to do it. But the basic moral of the story is, I think for the time being, you would expect more often than not for that to be a urine test.
Yep.
Over time, more and more will be oral. So you take that test, it all gets wrapped up, it gets kind of evidentially bagged, the employee gets sort of removed from the truck, and that's the end of the testing process in the truck.
And they don't go back to work at that point, right?
Well, it'll depend a little bit on your policy, but no, you
Okay.
wouldn't. You wouldn't. So that test, however, has to go through a bit of a process itself. And as a rule of thumb, again, it will depend on your policy and the specifics of how your place works. But in principle, that test is going to provide you with 2 samples,
Yep.
and you're going to do 2 tests.
Yep.
So you do a kind of a quickie version, which either says not negative.
Uh-huh.
Or
That's
negative.
the key word, right?
Yeah, so it doesn't
Not
say
negative.
positive, it says not negative,
Excuse me, yeah.
which kind of basically says we need to look into this again.
Yeah, so we'll do the second one now.
Correct. And then the second one is kind of, this is a bit more serious. We'll take a bit more time. We'll push into this a bit further. We'll look at it. We'll test it. We'll all the rest of it a bit more.
Yeah.
And long story short, that second test is kind of the one that's going to be the yay or nay, you've got a problem or not kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then those results wing their way out to you as the employer for you to be able to manage. Now, to be very clear, at that point, you have a test result.
Yep.
You don't have a misconduct or a breach of a policy because you've got to go through the process.
Right, of what
The
the policy says about
Yeah,
it.
which will normally mean have a meeting, have a conversation, investigate the circumstances. There may be a perfectly good reason for what this is, why this is, how this might be.
Yep.
Or alternatively, there may be a conversation around, hey, look, this person has got a reason or an excuse or some kind of explanation.
Yep.
I'm taking some medication at the moment for my back, whatever it might be, and that's triggered this result or it's triggered this kind of outcome. And the big thing out there for people at the moment is the medical marijuana situation.
Yep.
So you have people who are taking marijuana for a diagnosed and medical purpose. They'll obviously test positive in respect of that, but then there's a conversation about, well, is that inside the rubric of acceptable or not?
For the workplace, given the risk associated with the work that they're doing.
And so there's questions there about what that means for safety-sensitive areas.
Yeah.
What we're saying to people out there in the world is for that kind of conversation, it's probably best to start updating your policy or having a conversation about whether it's okay or not and on what basis it is. Now, as a quick aside, in the medical marijuana space, there's 2 points to remember here. The first one is it has to be legitimately authorized from a medical practitioner.
Yep.
So you kind of have to have the special medical certificate.
Yep.
But secondly, and this is occasionally the part people out there kind of neglect, it lets you access medical marijuana.
Yeah.
Which is not quite the same thing as I'm sure Trevor's down the road is of the quality of.
Yeah.
What that translates to mean is medical marijuana has kind of been specially designed to not have some of the dodgy parts in it.
Yep.
And that will demonstrate itself in the testing process.
Yep.
So most tests, most of the time, will tell you if the marijuana that's in the system is the acceptable medical kind or not, depending on the results of what's
So
in
the
it.
test is able to distinguish between the two.
Well, yes, in the sense that it recognises THC, I think it is.
I think it is,
So this one should have tiny little, not so much.
Yeah.
Whereas the more generously available in the community type has a much higher signature. So there are ways and means of playing with that, but I'm not a chemist. All I know is you can get a steer on that.
Oh, that's good. And I mean, we want that. We want it to be accurate. The employer wants it to be accurate. The staff member, the worker wants it to be accurate. We don't want false positives. I'm just going to go back a little bit, if it's okay, go forward. So you mentioned that there were 4 types of tests. The first one, and we're going to come to the fourth one, but let's just recap for our audience. You're all right. We'll see if I was listening to you properly to see if I can get them right. So the first test was, I'm looking for a job. I've applied for a job. I've been given provisional acceptance, but I need to pass I need to pass a drug test before I get offered the position. That was the first one. Second one was in safety sensitive areas where if the policy is in place, the organisation may decide, yes, we believe that there is cause and good enough cause for us just to say we're going to do some random drug testing, provided that we follow the policies and the procedures around letting them know it's going to be once a quarter, once a year, once whatever it is, and all that. And then the third one was what you were just talking about now, which is there's been an incident. Something has happened. It's quite reasonable to assume that there may be impairment involved, and we certainly need to rule that out. And the only way of ruling that out is to, I think you called it, call on the drug truck and get them to do a drug test on person or the people involved.
Welcome, sir. There's a spot for you in EMA Legal.
Brilliant. I was listening. So there's one more to go, the fourth one.
Reasonable cause.
Oh, yeah.
So reasonable cause is kind of in some respects, it's the most useful, and in some respects, it's the most difficult to understand or to action.
Okay.
But effectively, it is you have reasonable cause to suspect someone is impaired at work and potentially impaired on the basis of drug intake.
So there hasn't been an incident which has suggested we should test. It's more for whatever reason, perhaps the person's behaviour in the workplace, and you're like, this doesn't seem right. What do we do in that situation?
Yeah. So to be clear, it's the subjective version of the objective version of there's been an accident. So there's been an accident. You can see there's been an accident, right?
Yep.
The forklift hit the truck. No harm, no foul.
Yep.
This is kind of you subjectively saying, look, you don't seem to be standing quite straight or balancing well. Your eyes look glassy.
Yep.
Your speech appears to be impaired or slow. That kind of assessment. And so then you'd say, hey, look, I think there's a drug test in your future.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, people will say, look, I shouldn't, I'm fine, that kind of stuff. You get that. There's a discussion you need to have. Yeah. But this brings us to an interesting point about the refusal to undertake a drug test.
Which was going to be one of my next questions. It's okay. Can the employee, so the employer has suspicion, they believe there could be a good reason, but the employee says, well, no, I'm fine. I refuse to submit myself to a drug test.
Yeah. So
what happens there?
Well, I mean, that's sort of stage one. Sometimes they'll refuse and then they'll write back 24, 48 hours later saying, I will take it after the event may have cleared the system. So first and foremost, remember at the start, we talked about balancing some rights. We talked about privacy, right to sort of refuse a medical intervention or a medical event. So in theory, when you sign your employment agreement and you sign up to the place and the policy is made clear to you, you are agreeing kind of in advance to undertake a drug test. And so that agreement kind of exists for every moment in time thereafter.
Yeah. Even if it was signed many, many years ago, you've said, should I be requested, I will agree to have the drug test. Yep.
But that doesn't mean that can be held kind of post you, if you will, revoking or refusing that approval.
Yep.
So what happens is that an employee might decide to change their mind. I refuse to take a drug test.
Yep.
Now, a couple of things. It'll depend on when and how that happens. I've seen that happen, like the guy walks into the truck to have the drug test and then just says, no, I'm not going to do it, and they walk out.
Okay.
So to be very clear, you can't compel the drug test. You can't physically hold a person and take their hair, swab them, or kind of force them to urinate if you could type thing. You can't do that.
Yep.
What you can do, however, is draw some reasonable conclusions about the refusal to take a drug test and the information you have that has led you to suggesting it was worthwhile to do that.
Yep.
And you can put that to the person. Now, additionally, you can in your policy, and this is why the policy is so important, kind of include what might happen in the event of a refusal and what some of the issues are about that and how you might deal with that. Right. So it's one of those things, again, you're better to get some really solid legal advice and detail, because we think about all those issues and put that process in place so that everybody kind of knows in advance.
Right.
But to be really clear,
talk to people in Mauro's team. Yes, call AdviceLine. The number should be coming up on the screen now, and Mauro and his team can help you. So what then is it? It's persons refuse. They can refuse. What are the implications of that?
Yeah. So this is one of those how long is a piece of string moments.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say stuff like, well, that's going to depend on the facts and circumstances of your case.
Of course.
And it's going to depend on your policy and your procedure. But if you can kind of imagine ends of a spectrum, if you assume this end, and we'll call this end the worst end, you've got no real policy about what to do in this particular situation, although you've got everything else right. The person hasn't really done anything that might objectively suggest there's a real problem or an issue. You're gonna enter into struggle street. Right? On this end, the person's done something which, even if drug testing wasn't applicable, is going to be a serious matter of concern. Anyway, you've clearly said that in the event you don't do a drug test, I'm going to have to rely on this or that, or I can draw this implication. So you've pre-molded that conversation, then that's going to give you a lot more opportunity to make decisions. But I need to be clear about a couple of other things. So first off, a whole heap of those policies kind of predetermine the scope or the range of outcomes. So by that I mean there's a chunk of policies which will say we're a zero tolerance organization, right? And then there'll be some that'll say we'll consider every fact and circumstance.
Yep.
And then there'll be some that'll do like kind of we're a rehabilitation organization. So if we catch you, we're going to put you into a rehab program and you'll get a chance to do what you're doing. So again, what you do and what inference you draw will also be governed by what kind of outcomes you've already set as an expectation for your visit. Now, for all of you out there in TV land, quick note, there's some really interesting cases which have talked a little about having a predetermined view. So it's a little complex, but I'll explain quickly. If you've got a zero tolerance policy, sometimes the courts say things like, well, every person deserves to be looked after and considered in their individual circumstance. So you're just doing that without thinking about it might not be in good faith. So I think if you've got a kind of zero tolerance policy, you still kind of need to go through a process of assessing that policy in this particular instance with this particular person before making conclusions.
Yeah.
Back to you.
Yeah. Therefore, a zero tolerance policy wouldn't necessarily be fit for purpose for every organisation.
No, well, some people won't want it. And you don't have to have that.
Yep.
But I think what I'm really saying is if you want to action your organisation as zero tolerance, I still think you need to exercise your mind as a step in the process.
Yep. Okay. Quickly, let's talk about the types of drug tests. So you've mentioned urine testing. You mentioned swab, I think, in the mouth. Are there other types of drug tests that may be applicable?
Yeah, so those are the two that'll cover you 95% of the time here.
Yep.
Technically, you can have hair follicle testing.
You did mention that before.
Yeah, so hair follicle testing's
quite scientific, yeah?
Yeah, well, bigger brains than mine, mate.
Yeah.
But the thing about hair follicle testing, which is, how do I put this? There's not controversy, but there's a little bit of, there's an important thing to know.
All right.
So
I'm all ears.
Hair follicles have a habit of hanging around when it comes to drug testing, the drug result. So what I mean by that is a hair follicle will tell you a much further back in time story about the person.
As opposed to urine. Yeah.
And so there's a bit of a question mark about whether that's fair and what you're testing for and were they impaired in that precise moment and some other bits and pieces. Now, someone's got to make an argument about that and there's got to be conversations around the applicability of whatever it is.
Yep.
But yeah, just bear in mind a hair follicle tells a longer story.
Right. So the person, if they do get a not negative, it could be from consumption from many, many weeks ago.
Now it's going to depend on the drug. So a little aside, for a moment at home, folks, what you need to know is as a lawyer, I have to know a lot about drugs. This doesn't mean that I take a lot of drugs. It just means that I know a bit about them. Different drugs have different lifespans in the system, right? So you depending on what you're testing for, you might have a variable range of existence for what's in your system or how long it clears out. But also, if you've kind of built up a muscle about something over time, your body can handle it and process it a little bit quicker. So there's a lot of variables in the story. And remembering that you're not in the workplace drug testing sense trying to find if someone takes drugs. You're trying to find if they're impaired in that moment, right?
In that moment,
so you kind of have to be very careful about getting a result which says someone might have taken drugs 2 weeks ago, but has no impairment whatsoever in the workplace today. So you kind of, there's a lot to balance in this process, right? The policy is really important.
What types of drugs are we testing for? We've mentioned clearly alcohol, alcohol and marijuana. They perhaps are the two main ones. Are there other types of drugs that we can be testing for?
So your normal drug tests probably testing for 4 to 6 kind of main or biggies. But let's take a moment, folks, and work our way through the New Zealand drug scene as best I understand it. So my information
not
comes
from personal experience.
Literally, watch me put my disclaimer in now. My information comes from working closely with the guys that drive the trucks. So we hear and we pick up what's happening out there in the world. So most of the time, a drug test is for marijuana, or a drug test is going to find a marijuana situation positive. And that's sort of, I don't know, anywhere between 60 and 75% of what's going to get caught. On average, if your drug truck pulls up about 1 in 3 times, they're going to find a positive test. So about 35% of the time, your suspicion or your test or whatever the reason is you've got it is going to generate a second positive.
Yeah.
Of that, 70-ish% of them will be marijuana.
Yep.
And then kind of what's the New Zealand story? Well, rocketing up the charts for New Zealand is meth. We're big fans, it looks like. So I think last year, it might be the year before now because we're in New Year. It was so last 2 cycles ago, I think 700 kgs roughly of meth was discovered by the cops, by the constabulary doing a fine job.
And that was in the papers at the time, the news at the time.
Now, I assume not all at once, but over a period of time. And then last cycle, that jumped to 1,400 kgs. So we're talking like it's almost exponential growth.
Appetite has increased.
Yeah, so that's the on-the-go biggie coming along. There are still what I would describe as a small clique of people interested in heroin and cocaine, but they're not. Cocaine's there's a little bit of growth in that, but those are kind of you've worked your way up to that and you're quite happy staying there type things. But you're unlikely. I mean, those are being tested for. But you're unlikely to come across that positive. It's usually going to be 90% of the time you're going to end up with a positive. It's positive is going to be marijuana.
Okay, all right. Just to finish off then, so let's say that some of our listeners, they're in organisations that haven't gone down the track of drug testing, but they're thinking about it. I know that you mentioned this at the beginning of the podcast, but just a quick sort of summary of, we're thinking about introducing some form of drug testing in our organisation. What do we do? Apart from calling EMA to find out what to do, what would be step number 1 for them? Step number 2?
I mean, you're going to need some advice. But I would say to you, there's probably a grab bag of thoughts that you could usefully have before you go to the advice process. So remember we talked about there were 4 kinds. You should have a bit of a think about what kind of drug testing you'd like to bring into your business. Of
those 4 kinds. The pre-employment, the safety-sensitive area, the incidents happened, and the last one, which was suspicion.
Reasonable cause,
thank you.
Yeah. So generally speaking, it's nice to have a bit of an idea about what you think might fit your business. Probably hop online and you can see some cases and you can see some commentary. Lots of lawyers make lots of comments about kind of what a safety-sensitive area is. Have a bit of a think about whether you think you have one. So to be very clear, that's an objective type test rather than a subjective one. You can't just say this part of my business is safety-sensitive. You kind of got to have some reasons and it's got to be ultimately agreed.
There have to be obvious hazards and risks identifiable.
And then you would ultimately get yourself a policy and start consulting that in. We've obviously got some, other people will too, but I would strongly recommend that you didn't just come up with one or chat GPT one.
Please don't do that.
This is definitely
serious stuff.
This is not that. You want a proper version which explains the processes, the procedures, and then you'll want a testing partner. So there's a few different companies around that'll drive the truck and come and see you and help you out, but you're going to want that partner. And then probably the other thing to make mention of is if you've got a union presence on your work site, then they would expect to be part of that consultation and conversation process. But other than that, I think basically have a think about the sorts you've got, check and see whether you've got a safety-sensitive area, and then get yourself into a conversation.
And start working on a good policy.
And look, that can be a serious situation too in terms of a proper conversation and consultation. So that's not going to be in a week or two. That's going to be in 2 to 3 months kind of thing.
Will take time.
And then just to be clear, you'd probably need to give a period of time before you undertook your first drug test.
Mauro, thank you so much for coming in today and sharing your knowledge and expertise. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of this podcast. Thanks again to Mauro. We hope that you've enjoyed this and we look forward to seeing you the next Health and Safety podcast. My name is Kevin Chambers and stay safe out there. Bye-bye.